The morning air bit sharp and clean as Maxine Rhodes adjusted her camera settings, her breath forming delicate clouds in the pre-dawn light. 20 years of wildlife photography had taught her to trust her instincts, and something about this morning felt different. The Canadian Rockies loomed before her, their peaks disappearing into low-hanging clouds that promised more snow. Her quest to document the elusive snow leopard had brought her to these remote slopes. Recent sightings had sparked excitement in the wildlife conservation community. These magnificent creatures weren't native to North America, and their presence here was both a mystery and a concern. Maxine had built her career on capturing such moments, turning fleeting glimpses of the extraordinary into lasting records of nature's endless capacity to surprise. The weather report had warned of an approaching storm system, but Maxine had weathered countless mountain storms before. Her gear was top of the line, her emergency supplies meticulously packed, and her satellite phone fully charged. She'd chosen her base camp location carefully, sheltered by a natural rock formation that offered protection from the prevailing winds. As she traversed the slope, her snowshoes left precise tracks in the fresh powder. The weight of her camera gear was familiar, almost comfortable, balanced against the emergency supplies in her backpack. The first signs of trouble came subtly, a shift in the wind's direction, a sudden drop in temperature that made her equipment creak in protest. Maxine paused to check her GPS coordinates, marking her position relative to base camp. That's when she noticed the wall of white moving toward her across the valley. It wasn't just snow, it was a full-blown blizzard, advancing with frightening speed. In all her years in the wilderness, she'd never seen a storm front move quite like this. The decision to turn back came instantly, but the storm moved faster. Within minutes, visibility dropped to mere feet. The wind howled through the rocks, driving snow and ice horizontally with such force that each exposed inch of skin felt like it was being sandblasted. Maxine pulled her goggles down and her face mask up, but the storm seemed determined to find every gap in her gear. Her GPS still showed her location, but the path back to base camp now lay through the heart of the storm. Each step became a battle against the wind, and the familiar landscape had transformed into an alien world of white. The rock formations she'd used as landmarks disappeared behind the curtain of snow, leaving her to rely solely on her electronic lifelines. As she fought her way forward, Maxine's mind raced through her options. Her satellite phone might still work, but who could reach her in these conditions? The nearest ranger station was hours away by snowmobile, and this storm would ground any aircraft. She was on her own, at least for now. The temperature continued to plummet, and Maxine knew she needed to make a critical decision. Continuing toward base camp meant fighting the storm head-on, but finding adequate shelter here on the exposed slope would be nearly impossible. Her years of experience screamed at her that movement meant warmth, but it also meant risking a wrong turn that could lead her further from safety. Then her GPS flickered. For a moment, the screen filled with random characters before going dark. Maxine felt her heart skip a beat as she pulled out her backup compass, only to watch the needle spin erratically. The storm wasn't just bringing snow and wind, it was playing havoc with her electronics. She forced herself to stop and think, drawing on every lesson learned from 2 decades in the wilderness. The storm had come from the northwest, which meant base camp lay roughly southeast of her position. But without visibility or working navigation, roughly could mean the difference between salvation and walking off a cliff. As the wind screamed around her, Maxine spotted a dark shape through the whiteout, a potential shelter. Moving carefully toward it, she discovered a deep overhang in the rock face, partially protected from the wind. It wasn't ideal, but it was better than pressing on blindly. She needed to wait out the worst of the storm, preserve her strength, and hope her equipment would function again once the magnetic interference passed. Setting up her emergency shelter within the overhang took every ounce of her remaining strength. Her fingers, despite the heavy gloves, had grown clumsy with cold. The wind tried to tear the lightweight tent from her grasp, but she eventually secured it, creating a small haven from the chaos outside. Inside the tent, Maxine checked her supplies. She had food for 3 days if she rationed carefully, a stove with fuel, and emergency blankets. Her camera gear, usually her most precious possession, now seemed like dead weight. But as she huddled in her sleeping bag, listening to the storm rage outside, Maxine knew the real test was just beginning. The blizzard showed no signs of weakening, and the temperature was still dropping. As darkness began to fall, Maxine focused on controlling her breathing, conserving heat, and staying alert. She'd survived close calls before, but something about this storm felt different, more personal, as if the mountain itself had decided to test her resolve. In the gathering darkness, she could only hope her experience and preparation would be enough to see her through the long night ahead. Dominic Thorne knew something was wrong the moment the storm's leading edge hit the ranger station. 25 years of mountain rescue experience had taught him to read the weather like a book, and this storm's chapters were written in warning signs. The barometer had dropped faster than he'd ever seen, and the wind patterns were all wrong for the season. The call came through just before the worst of the storm hit. A wildlife photographer had missed her scheduled check-in, last known position somewhere near the northwest ridge. As Dominic gathered his rescue gear, his mind was already mapping possible scenarios. The photographer's name was Maxine Rhodes. He recognized it from various nature magazines. She wasn't some amateur who'd wandered off trail, she was a professional who knew the risks. "You're not going out in this, are you?" Rita Martinez, his fellow rescue coordinator, watched him prep the emergency supplies. "The wind's gusting at 60 miles per hour, and it's getting worse." "That's exactly why I have to go," Dominic replied, checking his advanced GPS unit. "If she's caught in this, every minute counts." He didn't add that the storm was showing signs of becoming a once-in-a-generation event. The kind that changed landscapes and ended lives. The rescue snowmobile roared to life, its heated handgrips offering small comfort against the biting cold. Dominic had modified the machine himself, adding extra fuel capacity and emergency beacons. As he navigated through the worsening conditions, his headlamp barely penetrated the swirling snow. Radio contact with the station crackled and faded as he pushed deeper into the storm. The usual landmarks, rock formations, tree lines, and trail markers, had vanished behind the white veil. Dominic relied on his mental map of the terrain, built over countless rescue operations and training runs. 3 hours into the search, he found the first sign. A snow-covered tripod, half-buried but distinctly human-made, marked what must have been one of Maxine's photography positions. The discovery confirmed his worst fears. She'd been working on the exposed ridgeline when the storm hit. The wind howled through the rocks, carrying stinging ice particles that found every gap in his gear. His equipment was showing the same magnetic anomalies that often preceded major storms in the region, but this was different. The interference was stronger, more localized. His primary GPS was barely functioning, and the backup compass swung wildly. Dominic forced himself to stop and think. If Maxine was as experienced as her reputation suggested, she would have sought shelter rather than trying to navigate blind. The question was where. The ridge offered few natural shelters, but there was an old mining cave system that. A sound cut through the wind, faint, but distinct. Not natural. Not the storm. Dominic killed his snowmobile's engine and listened. There it was again, a whistle, 3 sharp blasts. The international distress signal. The sound seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, bouncing off rock faces hidden in the whiteout. Dominic pulled out his emergency locator, hoping its directional microphone could pinpoint the source. The device's display flickered against the magnetic interference, but it gave him enough of a bearing to start moving on foot. Each step was a battle against the wind and deep snow. The temperature had dropped to dangerous levels, the kind that could freeze exposed skin in minutes. But Dominic pressed on, sweeping his headlamp back and forth across the white landscape. The whistle sounded again, closer this time. Then he saw it, a dark shape against the endless white. Not the cave he'd been thinking of, but a natural overhang. As he approached, he could make out the faint outline of a tent, nearly buried in drifting snow. His heart raced as he saw movement inside. "Rescue services," he shouted against the wind. "Maxine Rhodes?" The tent's zipper opened partway, and a gloved hand emerged, followed by a frost-covered face mask. "Here." The voice was weak but determined. "GPS is dead. Compass too. Everything's failing." "I know," Dominic replied, already assessing her situation. The tent was well positioned, using the overhang for protection, but the temperature was still dropping. "I'm Dominic Thorne, Mountain Rescue. We need to move. This storm's getting worse, and there's a proper shelter about 2 kilometers from here." Maxine emerged fully from the tent, moving with the deliberate care of someone fighting exhaustion. "My camera gear has to stay," Dominic finished. "We'll mark the location. Right now, we focus on survival." As they prepared to move, Dominic explained his plan. The old mining cave he'd mentioned earlier would offer better protection, and he had its location memorized, no electronics needed. But getting there meant fighting through the worst of the storm, and the window of opportunity was closing fast. Maxine nodded, her eyes showing understanding behind her goggles. She'd already survived one night in the storm's grip, she knew what they were up against. Together, they began the arduous journey through the blizzard, each step a testament to human determination against nature's raw power. What neither of them knew was that the storm was about to get much worse, and their journey to safety was far from over. At the Silvercrest Research Station, Dr. Naomi Winters was about to make a discovery that would change everything they thought they knew about this blizzard. Dr. Naomi Winters stared at the readings on her monitor with growing concern. The Silvercrest Research Station's atmospheric sensors were reporting data that defied explanation. The storm system had developed in ways that violated everything she knew about mountain weather patterns, and the anomalies were getting stronger. "Take a look at this," she called to her research partner, Marcus Jensen, pointing to the rapidly changing numbers on the screen. "The magnetic field disturbances are off the charts, and they're following a pattern I've never seen before." Marcus leaned in, his forehead creased with worry. "These energy signatures, they're almost like what we saw during that solar storm last year, but localized. That shouldn't be possible." The research station, perched high in the mountains, was designed to study extreme weather phenomena. Its reinforced walls and backup systems made it one of the most secure facilities in the region. But as the wind hammered against the windows with increasing fury, Naomi wasn't sure even their state-of-the-art shelter would be enough. Their radio crackled to life, breaking through the static. "Silvercrest Station, this is Ranger Base. Do you copy?" The voice belonged to Rita Martinez, fighting through interference. "We copy, Rita," Naomi responded. "The interference is getting worse. What's your situation?" "We've got people out there. Dominic Thorne is attempting to rescue a stranded photographer. They'll need shelter, and your station is the closest safe haven. Can you maintain power?" Naomi glanced at their system's display. The station's main power was holding, but the backup generators were already running to maintain critical equipment. "For now. But Rita, there's something else you should know. This storm, it's not natural." The data scrolling across her screen told a story that seemed impossible. The magnetic anomalies were creating patterns that suggested some kind of resonance, as if the storm was being influenced by an external force. But before she could explain further, a violent gust of wind slammed against the station, and several sensors went dark. "Marcus, check the roof array." Naomi called out, but her colleague was already moving. The station's atmospheric sensors were their eyes into the storm's behavior. Losing them now could be catastrophic. Through the observation windows, the world had become a swirling chaos of white. The wind howled with an almost mechanical precision, peaks and valleys of sound that didn't match any weather pattern in their extensive database. Naomi's scientific mind raced through possibilities, each more improbable than the last. The station's computer system pinged with an alert. New data was streaming in from their deep field sensors, devices planted throughout the mountain range to monitor geological activity. They were picking up vibrations, rhythmic pulses that couldn't be explained by wind or snow movement. Marcus returned, snow covering his protective gear. The array is secure, but the ice buildup is like nothing I've ever seen. It's forming in crystalline patterns that don't match normal ice structure. Naomi pulled up the microscopic imaging from their external sensors. The ice crystals weren't just unusual, they were impossible. Their molecular structure was arranging itself in ways that defied the laws of physics, creating patterns that seemed almost engineered. "Rita, are you still there?" Naomi called into the radio. "We need to get a warning out. This storm isn't just dangerous, it's unprecedented. The magnetic interference, the ice formation, the energy patterns, something is affecting the natural weather systems." Static was her only answer. The communication system, designed to withstand the worst mountain weather, was failing. They were cut off, trapped in their high-tech fortress with their disturbing discoveries. A new alert flashed on the main screen. Temperature readings from around the station were dropping at an accelerating rate. The cold wasn't spreading naturally, it was moving with purpose, as if the storm was actively searching for something. Or someone. "The rescue team," Marcus said, voicing Naomi's fears. "They're out there in this. They have no idea what they're walking into." Naomi made a decision. The station's emergency protocols called for them to lock down in situations like this, but she couldn't just sit and watch as people risked their lives in a storm that defied explanation. They had equipment that might help, experimental gear designed for studying extreme weather conditions. "We need to prep the all-terrain vehicle," she announced, already moving toward the equipment room. "If this storm is being influenced by something, the source has to be nearby. Our sensors are picking up the strongest anomalies from the northwest ridge." Marcus grabbed her arm. "That's suicide, Naomi. The temperatures out there are dropping below anything we've ever recorded. Even our cold weather gear won't last long." "We don't have a choice," she replied, pulling up the station's topographical maps. "Dominic and the photographer are heading straight into the heart of these anomalies. They're not just fighting a storm, they're walking into something we don't understand. And we might be their only chance of survival." As they prepared for their dangerous mission, new data continued to pour in from their remaining sensors. The storm was evolving, its patterns becoming more complex, more deliberate. Whatever was causing these impossible conditions, it was growing stronger. What had started as a scientific mystery had become a race against time. Somewhere out in the blinding snow, two people were fighting for their lives, unaware that they were caught in something far more dangerous than a normal blizzard. And in the Silvercrest research station, two scientists prepared to risk everything to uncover the truth and save them. The real question was, would they find answers before the storm found them? Part 4, Convergence in the Storm. The mining cave entrance loomed before them, a dark mouth in the white void of the storm. Dominic helped Maxine navigate the treacherous approach, both of them fighting against wind that seemed to push back with conscious force. The temperature reading on his specialized gear had stopped working, but he knew they'd passed well below anything normal for the region. "Something's wrong with this storm," Maxine shouted over the wind as they reached the entrance. Her years of experience in extreme environments had taught her to read nature's moods. "The patterns, the wind direction, it's not moving like it should." Dominic nodded grimly. He'd felt it too, but hadn't wanted to voice his concerns while they were exposed on the ridge. The cave would offer shelter, but his instincts screamed that they were missing something crucial. The magnetic interference that had killed their electronics wasn't dissipating, if anything, it was growing stronger. As they moved deeper into the cave system, their headlamps revealed something unexpected. The walls were covered in a thin layer of ice, but not the random patterns of normal frost. These formations spread in geometric shapes, perfect hexagons and triangles that seemed to pulse with a faint, otherworldly luminescence. "This isn't possible," Maxine whispered, her photographer's eye-catching details that others might miss. She reached for her backup camera, a simple mechanical model unaffected by the magnetic disturbances. "Ice doesn't form like this naturally." Before Dominic could respond, a new sound cut through the cave, the distinctive rumble of an approaching vehicle. Moments later, bright lights illuminated the cave entrance, and two figures in advanced cold-weather gear appeared. Dr. Naomi Winters, Silvercrest Research Station, the first figure called out, pulling down her face mask. "And this is Marcus Jensen. We've been tracking some very unusual patterns in this storm, and they seem to be centered right where you're standing." Dominic felt a mix of relief and concern. The research station's presence meant backup and resources, but the scientist's words confirmed his worst fears about the storm's nature. "What exactly are we dealing with here?" Naomi moved forward, pulling out a handheld device that emitted a soft hum. "We're not entirely sure, but our data suggests this storm isn't just a natural phenomenon. The magnetic interference, the ice formations, the energy signatures, they're all pointing to something our instruments can't quite explain." Marcus was already setting up more sophisticated monitoring equipment, his movements quick and precise. "The patterns we're seeing, it's as if the storm is responding to something. Or searching for something." A deep tremor ran through the cave, dislodging small fragments of ice from the ceiling. The geometric patterns on the walls seemed to pulse more intensely, their glow strengthening. Maxine's camera clicked rapidly, documenting the impossible scene. "The energy readings are spiking," Marcus announced, his voice tense. "Whatever's causing this, it's getting stronger. And it's definitely centered somewhere deeper in the cave system." Naomi's device emitted a sharp tone. "These readings, they're similar to what we detected during last year's solar storm, but impossibly concentrated. It's as if something is focusing and amplifying the natural energy patterns in the atmosphere." Another tremor, stronger this time, sent them all bracing against the walls. The ice patterns began to shift, reorganizing themselves into new configurations. The air temperature dropped even further, creating visible waves of crystallizing moisture. "We need to make a decision," Dominic said, taking charge. "We can either retreat to the research station or press deeper and find the source of these disturbances. But whatever we decide, we need to do it fast. This cave system won't stay stable for long." Maxine stepped forward, her camera still capturing the evolving ice patterns. "These formations are spreading toward the deeper tunnels. They're like nothing I've ever documented before. If we leave now, we might miss our only chance to understand what's really happening here." Naomi checked her readings again, her scientific curiosity warring with caution. "The energy signatures are strongest about half a kilometer deeper into the system. There's something down there that's affecting the entire mountain's weather patterns. But the interference is getting worse. If we go deeper, we risk losing contact with the surface entirely." Marcus finished analyzing his data and looked up gravely. "There's something else. The pattern of these disturbances, it's not random. There's a rhythm to it, almost like a pulse. Or a signal." The implications of his words hung in the frigid air. The storm that had brought them all together might be more than just a freak weather event. It could be a message, or a warning, or something else entirely beyond their understanding. As if in response to their realization, the cave trembled again, and the ice patterns began to move with new purpose, forming corridors of light that led deeper into the darkness. The storm outside howled with renewed intensity, its voice now carrying notes that seemed almost mechanical in their precision. They stood at a crossroads, four people brought together by a storm that defied explanation. Behind them lay safety and certainty. Ahead lay answers, but also unknown dangers. The decision they would make in the next few moments would not only determine their own survival but might also unlock a mystery that could change their understanding of the natural world forever. The question was, were they ready to face what awaited them in the depths of the mountain? The decision to venture deeper into the cave system was unanimous, though each member of the impromptu expedition had their own reasons. For Naomi and Marcus, it was the pursuit of scientific understanding. For Maxine, it was the story of a lifetime. For Dominic, it was the need to understand the threat to ensure others' safety. They moved carefully through the tunnels, following the pulsing geometric patterns that seemed to guide them deeper into the mountain. Their headlamps caught crystalline formations that defied natural law, creating prismatic displays that danced across the cave walls. "The energy readings are off the scale," Marcus reported, his instruments emitting a constant stream of data. "Whatever's generating these patterns, we're getting closer to the source." Maxine documented everything with her mechanical camera, the click of its shutter echoing through the tunnels. "These formations, they're responding to our presence. Watch how they shift as we pass." She was right. The ice patterns weren't just growing, they were moving, flowing like liquid crystal, creating pathways that seemed to anticipate their movements. The temperature continued to drop, but strangely, they found themselves able to withstand it better than they should have. "The air composition is changing," Naomi announced, studying her handheld analyzer. "There's something buffering us against the cold. These conditions should be lethal, but somehow." A deep resonance cut through the cave, different from the earlier tremors. This was a pure tone, a single note that seemed to vibrate through their bones. The ice patterns flared with brilliant light, and ahead of them, the tunnel opened into a vast chamber. What they found inside defied explanation. At the chamber's center, suspended in mid-air, was what could only be described as a tear in reality itself. A vertical fissure of pure energy, perhaps 20 feet tall, pulsed with rhythmic waves that matched the storm's patterns perfectly. Around it, the air itself seemed to crystallize and flow in impossible ways. "It's a portal," Marcus whispered, his scientific skepticism warring with the evidence before his eyes. "Or maybe a window. The energy signatures match what we'd expect from a breach between dimensions." Dominic's rescue training kicked in as he assessed the situation. "The storm, it's not just weather. It's being generated by this thing." "Not generated," Naomi corrected, her eyes fixed on her readings. "Focused. It's using natural weather patterns as a lens, amplifying them through this interface." "But why?" The answer came in a way none of them expected. The crystalline patterns around them began to shift, forming structures that resembled writing. Not in any human language, but in mathematical symbols that Naomi and Marcus recognized. "It's an equation," Naomi breathed, quickly copying down the symbols. "No, it's multiple equations. Fundamental laws of physics, but with variables we've never considered. It's showing us how to bridge the gap," Marcus finished, "between our understanding of nature and what's actually possible." The fissure pulsed again, and new patterns emerged. Images formed in the crystalline structures, other worlds, other possibilities, glimpses of realities where the laws of physics took different paths. It wasn't just a window, it was a library, a repository of knowledge left by something else. "This isn't a threat," Maxine realized, still documenting everything. "It's a gift. A teaching tool. The storm was just a side effect of it trying to maintain stability in our atmosphere." As if responding to her understanding, the energy patterns began to shift. The violent storm outside the cave system started to calm, its purpose fulfilled now that the message had been received. The fissure's light dimmed, but the equations remained, etched into the ice with perfect clarity. "We need to get this data back to the station," Naomi said urgently.